Hello. In this podcast, today we're going to talk about Assembly Bill 2958 that was heard on June 21, 2022. This bill was introduced by Assemblymember Mark Stone, the chair of the Assembly Judiciary Committee. This bill attempts to stop the state bar's discussions regarding regulatory reform in the practice of law, which could have a significant impact on increasing access to legal advice, representation, and access to justice for Californians. There were arguments made for and against this proposed bill. According to the bill analysis, concerns have been raised about two working groups: the Closing the Justice Gap Working Group and the Paraprofessional Working Group. This bill provides that any state bar committee or subcommittee exploring a regulatory sandbox or the licensing of non-attorneys as paraprofessionals is required to adhere to and not propose any abrogation of the restrictions on the unauthorized practice of law. This bill purports to stop the state bar from being allowed to examine regulatory reform or make meaningful and necessary investigations into trying to expand the practice of law to increase assistance for those who represent themselves in legal matters. Because I was a member of the California Paraprofessional Working Group, I am familiar with the proposed paraprofessional program and all of the hard work that went into discussing this program. This working group met between April 2020 and April 2022. Many attorneys, judges, and public members were in attendance at these meetings. Public comment was requested and considered. And what came out of all of this work? This working group proposes to create a pilot program to be implemented in a few cities throughout California initially, to allow licensed and regulated legal professionals to give legal advice, allow them to represent persons in court, among other things, all in an effort to increase access to legal representation, legal advice, access to the court system, and access to justice for all Californians representing themselves in legal matters. At the hearing, people were given the opportunity to provide comments in support for or in opposition to the proposed bill. At the hearing, Chair Stone cited the lack of accountability that these programs would create and the potentials of these proposals to abuse Californians if these programs were approved. However, many hours have been spent on the Paraprofessional Working Group into identifying how to prevent consumer harm. For example, for the proposed paraprofessional program, if approved, there would be legal education and continuing MCLE requirements. There would be practical training and testing requirements. There would be a proposed discipline process, financial responsibility parameters set in place, and a proposed paraprofessional regulatory oversight committee to be established too. During the comment period, for those in support of this bill, a representative from Public Counsel stated that all they want to do is protect the public to avoid consumer harm. And to support their contentions, the representative refers to prior instances where non-lawyers were granted authority to assist the public with form preparation as immigration consultants. These supporters cite to examples of families at risk of deportation due to bad actors and immigration fraud. The practice area of immigration is not one of the areas selected for inclusion in the proposed paraprofessional program. It appears the only thing the representatives want to protect is the status quo of only having attorneys give legal advice and legal representation. Other bill supporters included attorney advocacy groups such as the California Employment Association, the Consumer Attorneys of California group, the California Defense Council. These groups appear only to want to protect their own interests, including the monopoly they hold on the practice of law as attorneys. However, there were others that opposed the bill. For example, David Dudell of the National Center for Access to Justice stated, "Millions of Californians lack access to justice." David referenced that in the report, "Working with Your Hands Tied Behind Your Back" by the National Center for Access to Justice, They interviewed social workers, librarians, legal document assistants, and social service providers about their experience with the UPL rules and how that has affected their ability to assist those persons with legal help. According to their report, the National Center for Access to Justice believes that a key part of the Access to Justice agenda is finding ways to empower people other than attorneys to use the law to provide legal services, to organize, and to fight for change. During their oral comments at the hearing, the National Center for Access to Justice also referenced their other report entitled UPL Enforcement in California: Protection or Protectionism. Those reports were created after speaking with document assistants and paralegals in California to get their views on the UPL enforcement process. The National Center for Access to Justice indicated that the existing UPL rules and laws interfere with people getting the essential legal help that they need with the most basic legal advice. Those reports point to the root of the issue. It's time to expand the practice of law to include non-attorneys to give legal advice, represent clients in court where appropriate, and help bridge the justice gap. In this hearing, we also heard from Mr. Ruben Duran, the chair of the Board of Trustees at the State Bar of California, where he updated the Judiciary Committee about the improvements made to the discipline system, which include the hiring of a new chief trial counsel. Mr. Duran reported that they can now focus on the remaining part of their mission, which includes efforts to increase access to and inclusion in the legal system. Mr. Ruben Duran stated, as a board, we believe that we cannot expect to get different results from the same efforts that have been tried for decades now when referring to access to justice. And I wholeheartedly agree. What is the harm in allowing the state bar to continue fleshing out their proposals, their discussions, to continue exploring regulatory reform, to then bring those proposals back to the legislator for them to kick the tires? And thereafter, the legislator could make decisions for the benefit of Californians. The proposed bill, AB2958, should be amended to give the state bar continued authorization to move the paraprofessional proposals forward for the legislature and Californians to consider. I urge you to reach out to the governor of the state of California, to the Judiciary Committee, and be part of those discussions. They need to hear from you. They need to hear from your clients. They need to hear from community leaders, activists, and those that are working with their hands tied behind their backs. It's time to give the law back to the people. And with that, I'll step down from my soapbox. Thanks for listening.